So today I am joined by Emma Hughes, who is a partner at Browne Jacobson. Emma, welcome, and thank you very much for joining me. Today we're going to discuss executive performance reviews, right? The chief executive's reviews are probably one of the trust board's most significant responsibilities, fundamental to the board's leadership of strategy and values, its accountability for educational outcomes and financial health, and its support for the development and well-being of the trust's most senior employee and accounting officer. Now, trusts have the freedom to define their own appraisal process for chief executives, right? As long as it's in line with their ethos and values. And that's what we're encouraging you to do today, is to design your own process. Principle 2 of the Academy Trust Governance Code makes clear that it's the board's responsibility to ensure there are proper arrangements in place for the supervision, support, appraisal, and remuneration of the executive. But how do we do this well? All right, let's get some slides going here. Hopefully you can see that now. Yes?
Yep.
Fantastic. So yeah, starting with the Academy Trust Governance Code, it is within Principle 2 that the board's responsibility is, that's their responsibility around the executive team. But we also know that that sort of new public management, has it gone to the next slide yet? No. There. Are you seeing it now?
Yeah.
Okay, we're on this one now. As we've said here at CST, the new public management style of managing people and organizations is beginning to run its course. It's had its day. External rewards, targets, high stakes accountability, they might be effective in the short term, but not as effective in the longer term. Sort of having backwards looking appraisals that come at the expense of improving current performance and grooming talent for the future doesn't really make sense for trusts anymore. And so if we want healthy, high functioning people and organizations, we need a much more nuanced and relational approach that is developmental and collaborative in nature. And it's going to tap into that intrinsic motivation that we all have as human beings. Am I right, Emma?
Absolutely. I'm like vigorously nodding away there. That you couldn't say it better.
Brilliant. And yeah, so we are trying to focus on that intrinsic motivation. We are trying to unlock that resilience, that prevention. So we want to be ahead of the game, and we want to make sure that we understand the complexity of what we're dealing with here. And so we want to evolve our practice, because we know that self-determination theory tells us that there are 3 basic psychological needs for growth and development. This includes our CEOs. They need to have a sense of agency, right? They need to feel a sense of competence, and they need to have that sense of relatedness. And this is true of everybody, but it is also true of our CEOs. So you need to be thinking about these things when we're developing our appraisal processes. Emma and our colleagues at Blue Sky Education have drafted this 3-part guidance for us here at CST that's going to form the basis of our conversation today. This is the first part. So Emma, let's start with this one. We're giving people the QR code so they can quickly scan it and it will pop up in their browser. But let's discuss the first part. In your view, what is the purpose of executive performance review?
Okay. I think the purpose of executive performance review is, from the outset, it is about making sure that the targets, the objectives that we are setting for the CEO and then the wider executive and the wider organisation is directly linked to our strategic priorities as a trust. The strategic priorities that the board should have set and agreed. So this is how it all cascades forward into making sure that we are delivering on those strategic priorities. We need to agree how they're going to be measured. I'm using the word agree. It's not the board. We need to agree with the CEO that these are the targets, these are the objectives, but we need to agree with the CEO. How are they going to be measured? How are we going to hold the CEO to account? We need to define what good looks like, what success looks like, so that there's absolute clarity about what we're expecting to see over the course of 12 months. But also
this is the framework, right? This is the framework within which the appraisal process sits, right?
Yes.
That's what, okay, fantastic.
Yes.
And it's in line with the regulatory environment that we sit in, right? So I've put the Academy Trust Governance Guide up, and this is a quote. The key word for me there, Emma, is development. That
Yes,
even the DFE agree that it needs to ensure the senior executive leader's development as part of the process. All right. So
I
we're
was
all in line with that one.
I was just about to say that on the previous slide, that whilst it's about setting objectives, targets, what does good look like, how are we going to measure? It is also about development, which is where we're
Yes.
coming on to the next slide. That
Yeah.
it's okay, that's great, but what support do you need to be to actually be able to deliver that?
Exactly. Um, all right. So really importantly, let's talk about the relationship between the chair and the CEO, because that's going to be central to this entire process. Talk us through it.
So we see all sorts,
Mhm.
really, not just in our sector, but all sorts where there is a chair and a CEO relationship. But we know that for that relationship to be really effective, it should be based on mutual trust and respect. People often talk about there being a tug of war,
Mm.
um, an imbalance of power sometimes.
Mhm.
We're less likely to see that where you've got mutual trust and respect. There needs to be a common language, this shared sense of purpose. We are aligned. Um, I think the opportunity to win hearts and minds is mutual. Um, I think if we're doing all of that, we're going to build commitment
Mm.
within the board, within the CEO and the wider executive. And I think if all of that is happening, we're likely to see strengths really at play. And when people are playing to their strengths, there's usually a high degree of job satisfaction and enjoyment.
So that's absolutely the key, isn't it? Is
Mm,
that relationship between the chair and the CEO. They're primarily responsible for that.
yeah, absolutely.
So we just put this slide in, didn't we, Emma? So
Yeah.
talk me through it. I like it.
Yeah, okay. The trust equation. So I think this is a good one for chairs to think about how much of this is present in the relationship. So if we have a good level of trust in the relationship, then we should see credibility, reliability, and intimacy, all of that together, divided by self orientation. So, what do
Mm.
we mean by that? Well, credibility is the words that we use to speak, how we might describe this individual. I can trust what she says about intellectual property. She's very credible on the subject. It's
Mm.
reliability. It says what it says what it says on the tin, that
Mm.
we deliver, we
Mhm.
say what we're going to do. Intimacy is about bringing some of yourself to the relationship.
Mhm.
That there isn't a 6 foot wall around you where you show up as CEO or chair, but you don't actually give any of yourself, anything beyond that, to
Mm.
build the relationship. And then self orientation just refers to that person's focus, um, their level of care, how much they care about the relationship and the other person.
Mm.
And if we're firing on all of those things, then generally it builds trust. And there's a link at the bottom of this
Mm.
slide to a page that you can watch some videos, and it's got further explanation, but it's really useful to watch and consider where you might be.
Brilliant. And then intimacy is sort of the same as the idea of vulnerability that Brene Brown
Yeah,
always talks about, right? That with,
absolutely.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Without that, you can't really be communicating. All right, I love the trust equation. Moving on to the process. What are the hallmarks of an effective executive review process?
Right. Clarity. Number
Mm.
one,
Number one.
clarity. I think where we talk about clarity about expectations, we're talking about clarity in your dialogue, but also clarity in terms of what we've got written down and agreed with each other.
Mm.
There is no ambiguity. This is what we've agreed. Um, what's the developmental route?
Mm.
What are the timescales? Where are the milestones? The
Mhm.
staging posts? Agree it together so that you are envisaging the race that you're going to run over the next 12 months.
Yeah.
Um, Transparency about the success criteria. There shouldn't be any surprises at the end of the year. So,
Mm.
if we've been really clear and upfront about all of this from the beginning, the CEO will know that, will be able to self assess how they are doing against the expectations. Um, There needs to be a common language. And then throughout, it shouldn't just be we set objectives, we set the targets, we do all this clarity at the beginning, and then we don't really touch it again until 12 months later.
Mm-hmm.
There should be a regular dialogue, and there
Mm-hmm.
should be this honest feedback, regular feedback throughout the year. Um, and then, yeah, respectful, keeping egos in check. If we were going to go back to one of that earlier slide about what's important, that shouldn't be showing up in a healthy
Yeah.
relationship between a CEO and a chair. And we need to park those things. It should be
And
mutual trust and
am I right that it's got to be agile? So if things develop during the year where certain risks that you may have identified, but they're not potentially being mitigated well enough or whatever, they may change the staging posts, right? They may
absolutely.
change the milestones.
Yeah.
I think that needs to be okay. Am I right? That
Yeah,
that has to be okay?
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think also on targets. So
Yeah.
we might set targets and objectives at the beginning of the year, and then something happens that
Yeah.
literally blows one of them out the water, and we can't
Yeah.
do that anymore.
Yeah.
We've got to keep it flexible and agile, you're right.
Yeah.
A continuous review.
Yeah. And we're going to talk about setting objectives later in the session. All right, let's talk about who should be involved in reviews.
Hmm.
Should we talk through each of the roles? So we got the chair. We talked about how important the chair is, and the chief exec, obviously. But what role do the other trustees play? I suppose depends on the
Yeah.
committee if it's been
It,
delegated to a committee.
yeah, it's interesting because every now and then we'll see a trust where the chair isn't actually involved in the appraisal panel,
Ah,
which is odd. Um,
yeah, it's interesting.
but I think if that is the case, the board just need to be confident that there is still this regular dialogue, regular review, because
Hmm.
the chair is the person that is doing the regular dialogue, the
Hmm.
regular review. It's leading the charge in terms of agreeing the strategy and the
Hmm.
strategic priorities. So to me, it feels odd that the chair isn't then involved in the
You know,
appraisal
the argument I've
process.
heard on that one is they want to preserve their relationship with the
Yeah,
CEO. But to me, if you're doing it well and you're doing it right, it wouldn't be damaging your relationship. It would be
yeah.
improving it.
Well, I mean, it's a line management
Yeah,
responsibility.
I agree.
So I just think about myself and my direct reports, and I just
Mm,
think, how on earth could I not do the annual performance review of my direct reports who I line manage? Why would I
yeah,
want to preserve the relationship? Because the annual performance appraisal could disrupt it. So it's a bit odd. Yeah, so I think the other trustees, yeah, if it's been delegated by the board to a panel to do the executive performance review, then what sort of assurances does the wider board want? What sort of reporting?
hmm,
Um, and I think also chairs need to think about shaking this panel up. It shouldn't be the same people
all the time.
all the time because we get into a bit, cozy situations sometimes. We need to keep this fresh, keep it live, but we do need to make sure that whoever's doing it are skilled and experienced and have been trained. Governance professional is the person that's actually making sure that this is all ticking over, that we're meeting those milestones. It shouldn't be a tick box exercise, but the governance professional should be making sure that you are meeting all the responsibilities.
Yeah.
HR is involved to give support and guidance, can
Hmm.
support with training. I mean, there's plenty of training that's probably going on across the trust to support other leaders and line managers to be able to do their own performance management. So why not involve the trustees and the chair in that? And then the external advisor, some trusts use an external advisor,
Hmm.
some
Hmm.
don't. I know that CST can advise as well in this
Yeah. Hmm.
space.
Yeah.
Um,
I think it
but
depends on the experience of the chair, doesn't it? And the experience of the
yeah,
board. If they feel like they're not equipped to do it well, it certainly helps to bring in external support.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, let's talk about 360 reviews because they have a role to play, don't
Mm-hmm.
they?
Yeah.
In this. And not everybody's comfortable using 360s. I know that it's certainly something that some trusts don't feel comfortable using. What's the advantage of introducing a 360?
So, so Browne Jacobson are users of 360s,
I love
and
that.
and I've I've had 360 done twice,
It makes you
and
vulnerable, I suppose, is the problem, right?
yeah,
It's
yeah,
yeah.
it's personally, I think it's probably been one of the most insightful
Wow.
pieces of feedback, because I think people, you receive it anonymously. There's always the chance that you're going to be able to spot who has said
Hell.
what.
Yeah.
But and I've definitely, I know, having been a user of it as an HR professional within organisations, I know that there are definitely people that receive the feedback and they'll say, I don't think that this has been useful because I don't think they know me well enough to
Mm,
have been able to comment.
mm,
Um, and my feedback there is, okay, but that is how they are perceiving you. So
exactly.
you have to receive that as it
Hmm.
is. They may not know you well enough, but that is their perception of you. And if you don't agree with it, then that is something that you need to think about. You know, is that something that you want to change?
Hmm.
But that's the sort of thing that you get in a 360 that you don't get anywhere else.
Absolutely. I totally agree.
So it does make you vulnerable. But I think as long as it's set up properly, and I know that the blue sky
Yeah.
solution is really honed into competencies and behaviours of the
Yeah.
CEO.
Yeah.
So it's shaping and leading the gathering of feedback in the right way.
Hmm.
It's not just open ended.
Hmm.
Um, and then the results are aggregated, which is great. But I think also you can have some really great conversations on the back of a 360
Mm,
report. You
hmm.
know, what showed up for you when you read that?
Yeah. How did you
Great
feel?
question.
Yeah.
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 What were the things that stood out for you the most?
Yeah.
Now, some people will look for the all the negatives
Yes.
first and
Yes.
just
Yes.
won't see any of the
Yeah.
positives.
Yeah.
Other people will see all the gloss and not see not see the challenging bits at all, which in itself is telling, isn't
I
it?
tend to be the former. I only see the criticism.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Me too. And you know what's great is that I need that. I need somebody to be able to say to me, yeah, but what about all of this? Did you not
Yeah.
see this? Well, yeah, I
Exactly.
did, but really, I'm thinking about that. Yeah, there's a place for that, but look at all of this.
Yeah.
So, uh,
But
I,
it's all about it being facilitated, right? That you're not just throwing the report at them and letting them deal with it on their own. It's a facilitated process. And that seems really right to me.
leadership is really hard.
Yes.
It's a daily grind. If you
Yeah.
think that you're the finished article and you have done it all, been
Yeah.
there, done it, then
Yeah.
that's a problem. So if we're frightened of a 360 because it might tell us things that we don't want to address,
Hmm.
then that's an issue that you need to work on in yourself, I would
Yeah.
say.
I agree.
Yeah.
Brilliant. All right. Well, so those 360 reviews, but there's also a role for technology. Um, Talk us through this. What's the role that technology can play?
Yeah, I mean, there's loads of software solutions available that can support the performance management cycle.
Hmm.
So, you know, you'll have all the storage of your objectives, your targets.
Hmm.
You'll record all of your conversations, the outcomes of your conversations. You can record your performance progress.
Mm.
And again, I know that Blue Sky does this,
Mm.
but there are others out there as well.
Mm.
But I
Mm.
think it's useful because it just keeps you on track, and
Yeah.
it's a great place to have everything in one place.
Yeah. Yep.
So
What
yeah,
struck me was that allowing for forward focused conversations, because there is it's so often the case that you're still trying to establish what the current picture is. If you've got tech that's giving you a live picture of what's going on, I was struck by that when I read the paper.
yeah,
Um, just allowing it to be forward thinking, forward focused. So, okay, so now we're going to talk about your second paper, which was called Process Planning and Delivery. Um, what does an effective process look like? I'm going to show you that slide and see if that we can set it all out for our listeners.
yeah. I'm so glad we've got that visual because it's quite difficult to explain this.
Yeah.
But so let's start with the red the red circle.
Yeah.
So as a board, we have the trust vision. we've agreed a strategic plan, we've
Mm-hmm.
got our strategic priorities and goals. That should be influencing our objective setting, our
Mm-hmm.
target setting.
Mm-hmm.
We've done all the bit in our earlier discussion about agreeing the metrics, how we're going to measure it, what success looks like, what support's needed. Then we're going to go into a mid-year review, depending on which way I appear on your screen.
Mm-hmm.
So we then go into the mid-year review. Um, and at that point, that's where we're thinking about, okay, we're agile, we're flexible to this. Do we need to refresh the objectives?
Right.
Has one of them been cancelled? Does one of them need to be beefed up a bit? Do we need to change the measures? We're a bit too shy on the target. Does it need to be better?
Mm-hmm.
And then we finish up with an annual review where we take all of that great stuff, including the regular one-to-ones, which is at the heart of the diagram. We take all of that great stuff together in terms of measuring the output towards those strategic objectives. Have we achieved? And then we take all of that, and that will inform separate process, separate committee probably on the reward
And
conversation.
we're gonna come to that. But the important thing being it shouldn't just be something that happens twice a year, mid-year and
No,
annual. There should be
no,
things in between that are
yeah,
explicitly part of the review process.
yeah,
Okay. Um, all right, talk about timescales. Let's talk about timescales.
yeah. You touched on it at the very start where you said, we've got to get into a new phase now where we're not just going into an annual appraisal, where we're talking about all the past.
Yeah,
You know, um, if you're spending 80% of the conversation talking about the past year,
yeah,
then that's not right.
right.
Because by the time you get to that point,
Yeah,
we've had so much conversation, so much dialogue, so much measurement. It should be 20% of the conversation is
got it.
about the past performance, and 80% is about right now looking to the
All these other
future.
bits right here.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Future expectations. Where do you see your career going? How are you
Mm,
feeling? What development do you need?
yeah.
That's the biggest part of the annual performance appraisal discussion.
And is it acceptable to ask how long they anticipate being with the trust? Is that just a rude question to ask? Only because I'm thinking so much about succession planning nowadays, and it feels like we should be able to have honest conversations about how long
Yeah,
we expect to be in role, and so that there can be good planning.
yeah.
Is that not done?
I think it's how you ask it. So, how long are you going to be in the role is probably not the right the right to phrase it. But I think if you were going to say, right, key priority for the board is about succession planning for the
Yeah.
CEO and the wider executive, start with what's your plans for the wider executive.
Yeah.
Usually, what will come out of that is, well, I'm thinking I'm going to move on in the next 12 months to two
Yeah.
years. So, like my succession plan, so you get your answer
Yeah.
by having that conversation.
Got it. I do think we need to start being honest about that in all of our roles,
Yeah,
because we have to take that
yeah,
stewardship mindset where we're happy to pass on the baton.
yeah,
Let's talk about the panel. Massively important who sits on this panel, right?
yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, I mean, those three questions are just so important.
Mm,
You'll know from your skills audit, have you got a sufficiently skilled and experienced panel? People can have done performance appraisal as leaders and line managers in their careers,
mm-hmm.
but do they understand their responsibilities as a trustee within a multi-academy trust and the regulatory framework that sits around it? Do they understand education well enough to be able to understand the data and challenge?
Mm,
I think that and finance, I think, are the two
mm,
that most trustees, if they're not skilled enough
mm.
or have enough knowledge in those areas, are probably not going to be able to come to the table with enough oomph to be able
Yeah,
to really hold the CEO to account, and that's where your external advisor can help.
yeah,
But where I see external advisors going wrong is where we're using the same external advisor and have done for years and years and years and years. Perhaps they were, because external advisors come from a place where in in maintained schools, it was always an expectation that head teachers would have an external advisor with the governing body.
yeah.
Um, and it's kind of carried on
Oh, interesting.
with CEOs. You wouldn't
Yeah.
see an external advisor in a PLC or
No,
in
no, that's true.
other examples, but we seem to have carried that forward, which is not a bad thing,
Yeah.
because if there is a genuine gap, then external advisors should be filling that, not
Yeah.
just the same old, same old.
I think for me, it's also about the CEO feeling a sense that they can respect the process and that there's integrity in the process and that the people who are holding them to account actually know what they're talking about. That it leads to a certain level of confidence in the process, doesn't it? Which would be
Yeah,
lacking if they didn't have the right training and knowledge.
absolutely.
Brilliant. So let's talk about how we evaluate performance, the CEO's performance. I have had CEOs call me and say, the only thing I'm being measured on is the academic performance across the trust.
Yeah.
How do you feel
And
about
then,
that?
and in COVID, that was incredibly difficult because we didn't have that. We didn't have, it was very, very problematic to get that data.
Yeah.
Um, so I'd like to think that trustees who were on the board at that time developed other sources
Hmm.
of data and intelligence to be able to make a judgment about someone's performance, because it isn't always it doesn't always have to be qualitative data. It can
Hmm.
be
Hmm.
it doesn't always
That can be
have to be
quantitative.
quantitative data.
Yeah.
It can
Yeah.
be qualitative data as well. So 360 review is great if you're doing that. Have you got a Durio, for example, or a Durio doing
Staff
surveys within your
surveys.
organisation? So it might not just be staff surveys, it could be parent surveys. What stakeholder intel have you got? Um, what are the views of your committee chairs, but also what's the views of your local governing body chairs?
Hmm.
And then performance data. I mean, I think the education sector are big users of data.
Yeah, they are.
Actually, more so than a lot of other sectors. So
Yeah.
there's an abundance of data. There's plenty to go at. I think the danger is probably
Too much.
choosing too much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's a reflection of the fact that the CEO's role is not, while educational outcomes are obviously primary, it's such a bigger role. It's about running
Hmm.
an organization, isn't it? So it's about
Yeah.
taking care of staff and listening to stakeholders
Hmm.
and so many other aspects of the role. So
Yeah.
here are some inputs and evidence that you've listed in your paper. Um, and again, I think these all feed into that holistic picture you're generating around your CEO,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. I mean, there's the financial benchmarking tool that you can
Mm,
use on the
mm-hmm,
.gov website, where you can
mm-hmm,
go in and compare your trust with other trusts based on similar metrics. So it could be pupil numbers, it could be the level of income, it could be the phase of education. So you can generate some comparative data against up to 19 other trusts. So you
mm.
have 20 in total. Well, that's brilliant
That's very
intelligence,
helpful.
because you can start to see, well, what's our reserves looking like? What's our in-year budgeting looking like? How much do we spend on X, Y, Z? So you can start to look at that. It is based on the previous year,
Mm-hmm,
so you would need to get some of that information from your CFO,
mm-hmm.
or you just ask your CEO to be pulling all of that through in their self-evaluation.
Right, right, right.
Um, but there
And
is
self
this,
eval is a big part of it, isn't it? The self
yeah,
eval.
absolutely.
Brilliant.
I think the CEO, if you didn't include that, it would be an own goal. I think
Yeah.
the CEO has got to be able to present their evaluation of the performance of the organisation for which they're accountable.
And when we
Mm.
say other assessments, maybe we mean external validation. So
Yeah,
Ofsted results, maybe
yeah. Could
um,
be peer
auditors.
peer review, yes,
Yeah,
auditors. You
yeah,
might have other organisations come in and do other audits of
yeah,
functions. You could have school improvement partners,
yeah,
ear survey.
yeah. Okay. So those are our inputs. Now we're going to move on to our review meeting and how we conduct the meeting itself.
Mm.
Really
Yeah,
important.
this is the bit that everybody gets a bit worried about. Um, And I know you've got a quote further on,
Yeah.
but there's another, we've not included it here, but there's a great book called Radical Candor
Oh,
as
yeah,
well
yeah, yeah.
by Kim Scott
Hmm.
that's worth looking at if you're particularly worried about going into this meeting. But yeah, we said no surprises, didn't we, earlier? So
Hmm.
you shouldn't be coming into this meeting where there's going to be a surprise. If there's some challenge, if we've got a situation where the CEO hasn't met their targets and objectives, and you're nervous about delivering that feedback, really you shouldn't be, because this is something that the CEO should be aware of.
Yeah.
Um, Equally, if it's gone really well, then I guess there's less nerves about this conversation. But I think
Yeah.
using strengths, and
We're
you'll
going to talk
see,
about that on the next slide. Let me pull it up. But by
yeah,
the way, I just want to say there's a correction on this slide. It should say establish context, not content. My bad. All
yeah,
right, let's talk about strengths as a basis
yeah.
for discussion.
So this comes from a place of, if we're playing to our strengths, then we should enjoy our work, and therefore we've got a higher chance of seeing high performance.
Mhm.
So just setting the premise there. But
Yeah.
if we're using strengths as a basis for feedback and discussion, then we've got a better chance of being able to pick out those strengths and encourage the person to continue to develop and do that
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what we should be doing is sharing an observation of something that you believe is their strength. So the example here is, I noticed how good you are at explaining the education jargon. We were in the boardroom and you were going through that presentation and everybody was with you. You could see that everyone was engaged. And that's how you're explaining how you saw this strength being used. And then you're talking about the impact, which is the frame at the end. And so what you're then saying, so that really helped the non-teachers around the boardroom feel comfortable and contribute more effectively, because look at the engagement we got on that discussion. Um, it's really great to see that. Keep that going in the boardroom, because I think that's a real strength. You can also flip it. So I haven't got a
Yeah.
slide on this, but you can flip it for the more sort of um,
Difficult messages.
difficult messages
Here,
where you might.
let's hold on to that one and go to the honest feedback, and then we'll go to delivering
Okay.
difficult messages.
Yeah. Okay.
This is probably the quote you were thinking about from is it maybe
Yeah, it is
Brene Brown?
totally. Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And we'll come on to that with the inner game as well
Oh,
further
right,
on.
right, right.
But
Exactly.
but it's not the fear that gets
Yeah.
in the way of daring leadership. It's the armor.
God,
I
absolutely.
love that.
It's so true as well. I've met
Yeah.
so many leaders and trusts who have thick armor on
Mm.
all the time.
And we all
um,
do it.
yeah,
All
we
of
all
us
do
do
it.
it.
Yeah.
It feels icky to give people challenging feedback, developmental feedback, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
It feels icky. You're kind of going out of your comfort zone. Some people find it much more easier to do than
Yeah.
others.
Yeah.
But what it does is it triggers your fight, flight,
It
freeze,
does.
fawn mechanism,
Yes.
and you're either going to go with it or you're going to bow out
Yeah.
and not do it. But we know, and that's where Kim Scott's book really comes in on
Yeah.
radical candor. We know
Radical candor.
that we're doing that person a disservice.
Yeah. 100%. All right. So this is the delivering difficult messages slide.
Yeah. So using that strengths-based feedback as an
Mm,
example, if we flip
mhm.
it, it's one of your strengths is, and I've told you this before, one of your strengths is being so great with the education jargon. And we were
Mm,
talking about this recently, where you were in the boardroom and you were delivering this report, and um, you did so well with breaking down the jargon and making it so easy to understand that the non-teachers in the boardroom completely got it. The level of engagement was there, and they were asking all sorts of questions. We had a great discussion. But the other day when you delivered your report, it just wasn't quite there. And what I saw was, I think we'd lost some of the trustees. Some of the people didn't quite understand what you were trying to say, and as a result, we had quite a unstructured and difficult conversation at the end. What happened?
yeah.
what happened for you in that meeting? What didn't show up? And that's just a really great way of, rather than saying that was rubbish, it wasn't good enough, instead we're saying this is your strength, but it didn't show up today. What
Yeah.
happened? A far more accessible way of delivering the feedback, but also great for the person to say, do you know what, you're right. I rushed it. I should have spent more time doing that. Okay, what's going on for you? Why were you rushing it?
So you've sort of explained how you structure it, right? So you structure it.
Yeah.
It's kind of intuitive, isn't it? Start with the good stuff,
Hmm.
and then you can say, well, and then what happened here? So
Hmm.
you're managing the emotional response, and hopefully it's all based on trust, which
Yeah.
makes the whole thing more
Yeah.
possible and honest. Um, so I think I have a second slide on this. There you go. Um,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah,
So I think where we deliver this feedback and we have a defensive response,
yeah,
I think we've just got to keep listening
yeah.
and asking questions. So, okay, that's interesting. What were you hearing when I shared that with you? Well, I've just heard that you've basically said that that was a terrible performance in the book. No.
Yeah.
So you're going to get to the heart of what's triggered that response. So remember, fight, flight, fawn,
Mm-hmm.
freeze. If we've
Mm-hmm.
got somebody coming out of on the defensive, they're fighting.
Yeah.
But what we know is what's triggered within them is I don't feel safe, I feel challenged, I feel threatened. And we don't actually want them to feel like that.
Yeah.
We want to have a relationship that's based on trust. We want to have a grown up relationship where we
Yeah.
can give each other feedback, and we want to be a learning organisation and learn, and
Yeah.
we want to have a growth mindset, you know. Um,
Oh, we have the grow model coming up, don't we?
yeah, but so I think keep asking questions, keep trying to understand why they're reacting the way they are.
Yeah.
And then hopefully by doing that, you're going to come to a place where we're getting into solutions and next steps and shared understanding, mutual trust, all the stuff we said at the beginning, the good things that
Yeah.
should be there between the relationship of
And I
CEO
think
and
the next
chair.
steps is so important, isn't it, to have that included. Um,
Yeah.
let's talk about objectives.
Hmm.
Seems quite difficult, isn't it? It's not an easy thing setting objectives. Objectives. I think people struggle with this. Can we talk through the smarter goals
Yeah.
model?
Yeah. So I think you're absolutely right. Everybody sort of rolls their eyes when it's like,
Mm,
oh, it's objective setting. That's noddy. We know
mm,
smart.
mm,
But actually, when it comes down to sitting down and actually drafting them, it's
mm,
a lot harder than you think. So go into it knowing that we're not going to get it right on the first cut. It's going to take time. But yeah, it's smarter. So it's specific. We need to be very specific about what the target is, the objective. In that drafting of the objective, we need to be saying how we're going to be measuring it. So
mm,
we're expecting, we want to see the trust grow from 10 schools to 13 schools within the first year. So the measure is we want three school gain. It could be we want more pupils. Um, is it attainable? Well, on that basis, we need to be thinking about, well, how attainable is that? So it's not that we're putting that into the drafting, it's more about a judgment that you have to make. Um, are we in a position that we might have schools taken away from us? If yes, then we shouldn't be asking for more.
mm, mhm,
Is it relevant to the strategic priorities that we've agreed as a board? Is that taking us to the North Star that we're all trying to achieve? Is it time bound? So it could be that this objective isn't over a 12-month period. It could be that it's a 3-year goal.
mhm.
But we should be putting that into the drafting of the objective. How are we going to evaluate it, and how often are we going to review it? Which are those
The additional
milestones?
ER. Yeah.
Yeah, the additional ER of smarter. Yeah.
And it's really tricky because I imagine, let's say you have a trust that's struggling with retention, staff retention, and that becomes one of the goals is we're going to
Hmm.
increase staff retention. There's so many different factors that feed into that.
Yeah.
And how you measure it can't just be what is the retention rate? You have to understand the nuance around why you might be losing teachers in a particular school and what might be outside the
Totally.
CEO's control.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that would likely come off the back of these smart objectives is a tactical plan.
Exactly.
So you have these overarching objectives that
Yeah.
follow the smarter framework, but what sits underneath it are, well, what are the hows? What
Yeah.
are the tactics? How are we actually going to
And
get there?
actually, this slide I think is helpful for that, right? It's kind of an example that you give um,
Yeah,
of objective setting, right? Objective on the left, the key results in the middle,
yeah,
timeline, and the impact and success criteria.
yeah.
Um,
If
that's
you want
just really
to,
helpful to see that kind of laid out,
and
an
if you want to
example.
read up more on that
Mm,
approach, then look for OKRs or
right.
objective key results.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So, still on objectives, these are some of the pitfalls, right? Of
Yeah,
doing it badly.
yeah. So I've worked with a trust where we had a new chair, and the chair came in, didn't like any of the performance, didn't think it was good enough. Um, there wasn't any mutual trust. There was
Mm.
no investment in the relationship. That trust equation that we talked about at the
Yeah,
beginning, there was
exactly.
no investment in that at all. The the chair just wanted to kind of set out their stall, so decided these were going to be the objectives going forward. Didn't and dictated. It was command
Mm-hmm.
control. We're not going to get anybody to perform to that way of working. So
No,
it has to be
agree.
mutually agreed. Yeah, we can't just be like kids in a sweet shop and just go with whatever is sparkly at the time. It has to be disconnect. It cannot be disconnected from the strategic plan. We've got to remember what our North Star is. Is that helping us achieve that?
Mm-hmm.
We need to invest in training, so the trusts have got to be equipped to be able to do it. We can't just approach this as a tick box exercise, because there won't be quality objectives, which means
Mm-hmm.
we won't have quality conversations, we won't have quality measurements, and then at the end of the cycle, we won't have quality output.
Yeah.
And the one at the bottom, I remember doing some work with CST
Mm.
several years ago now on executive performance review. And we had a mixed group of people. There were CEOs, there was HR people, trust governance professionals, there was chairs. One of the pieces of feedback that came out of a breakout room discussion was the CEO had said, if I delivered appraisal the way for my team, the way that the board deals with mine, I would expect grievances. I would expect my team to be having a word with me about how poor it is.
Oh,
And the reason for that was because they basically said, I do all the work. I do my self evaluation form. I go into a meeting. There's no preparation from the panel. They nod along. They say, I've done a great job, pat me on the head, and that's it.
so the CEO has just done everything and they've done nothing.
And it's not, there's no meaning, there's nothing meaningful about it at all.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a real lost opportunity.
Mm.
Um, so next step, evaluation and reporting back.
Yeah, so in terms of the delegation, everything in that box is really important.
Mm.
So what have you agreed as a committee? What has the board delegated? That point I made earlier about what do the other trustees on the board want in terms of assurance?
Mm.
So some that could be that the committee presents back to the board the key things that came out of the performance year and the performance appraisal,
Mm-hmm.
with some recommendations, but also about what's coming for the next 12 months, because we remember we're only going to spend 20% of that time looking on the past. It'll be
Yeah.
80% going forwards, and the board
Yeah.
should be aware of how the trust is performing anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
So if we're working to that basis of, the committee is coming in to report back, really we should be expecting 20% on summarising what we already know,
Mm-hmm.
and 80% of some blue sky thinking about what we're doing next,
Yeah.
and have a good conversation about objectives, the strategic goals,
Yeah.
seek input
Yeah.
from that.
And I think for me, the concept of collective responsibility is really paramount here, because sometimes we get reporting mechanisms that aren't effective and the whole board doesn't feel involved, and they absolutely have collective responsibility around this. So,
Mhm.
uh, okay, so we are going to move on to part 3, continuing the conversation. To me, I think this is the most important part, if I'm honest, is the maintaining those positive conversations rather than just having appraisals just be a couple of activities in a year. Um, so let's go to what we're talking about here, conversations with purpose.
Yeah, I agree. This is the most important bit. This is the golden thread that runs throughout the relationship,
Mm-hmm.
the whole process, everything. If
Mm-hmm.
we don't get this right, we aren't going to have all that great stuff at the beginning, that good relationship that exists. So, and it takes work. It's hard work.
Mm-hmm.
But it can be isolating. Especially when you're the CEO, you do need a place to be vulnerable. You need a place to be able to say, I'm struggling with this, or
Yeah,
I'm struggled this year.
yeah,
I'm not sure I'm getting this right. They need a safe place to be able to talk like that, seek support.
yeah,
Um, so, yeah, having a common language, making sure that we're investing in that trust equation so that we've
yeah,
got the right conditions in place to be able to have good psychological safety,
yeah,
that fail first act in
yeah,
learning, is there. Um,
yeah.
but yeah, I think this is super, super important.
Hi, let's talk about this concept. Appreciative inquiry. Is
Yeah,
it appreciative? And I've done it wrong again on the slide. I think I have.
yeah, yeah, it is. It's appreciative inquiry. Yeah. Well, look, I didn't spot that either. Um, yeah, I think so. Again, it's all about strengths.
Well, it is. It's the strength-based idea again, coming at it from that perspective. Yeah,
Yeah, glass is half full.
yeah,
Instead of going in looking for all the challenges, things we
yeah,
could do better, it can be demoralizing.
yeah, absolutely.
Um, we need to celebrate the things that we're doing well.
Mm-hmm.
There will always be things that could be done even better. There will
Mm-hmm.
always be things that we shouldn't have done. But that's okay because we're a learning organisation and we need to be able to perform and do our best. And along the way, we might not get it right all the time. That is okay.
Yeah.
Um, but along the way, there'll be some fantastic performance, some brilliant strengths, and some success too. So we need to be really majoring on that because where we find strengths, we find high performance.
Yeah,
We find enjoyment, joy.
exactly. It's that feeling
Um,
of competence, isn't it?
yeah, well,
Engagement. Yeah.
we all know the stuff that we do that are our strengths because we enjoy doing it, we have fun, and we generally produce great work with things that are our strengths. Things that aren't our strengths, we find hard work.
Yeah.
We don't
This is
enjoy it.
this is actually important, isn't it?
Mhm.
How you use this kind of strength-based model. Do you want to walk us through this 3
Yeah.
stages?
So, what we're talking about here is this is about that word there, specificity and detail.
Yeah.
So it's not just making generalized statements, it's about really ensuring that what the judgments we're making is grounded in evidence. So it's storytelling.
Yeah.
What has been working well? And then stage two, it's what has contributed to that really great success story. How do we codify that going
Mm.
forward? What was the
Mm.
support that was there? What conditions were there and right to make that so successful? How do we replicate that? Um, so yeah, that's going into stage three. How do we make sure that we keep that cycle of strength and success moving forward, rolling forward into other things?
And what is this concept, this inner game? Tell us about
Yeah.
that.
So the inner game is it talks here about potential. So it's the potential that you feel you have, but what happens is we as leaders, we can be plagued by interference that
Mm.
then meters out that level of potential, and that then delivers the level of performance that we might have. So the inner game was actually about tennis. So Tim
Ah,
Galway developed this about tennis performance in tennis players,
I see.
but it's a well used concept in executive coaching. But it's about, through coaching, it's about unlearning the interference, unlearning the
Yeah.
personal and cultural habits that we
Yeah.
develop that interfere with our ability
Yeah.
to perform.
Yeah. It's
It,
that inner dialogue, isn't it? It's the stuff that goes on in
yeah,
your head. Yeah. Okay.
yeah, yeah, imposter syndrome, if you like. And one of the ways out of it is that Tim talks about is relaxed concentration.
Mm.
You can't have relaxed concentration if you don't have all those other conditions in place where we've got good
Mm.
psychological safety,
That's right.
we're having a calm, safe conversation with somebody that I know I trust, who they trust me, that I know they support me. You're not going to have that relaxed concentration if it's tense and
Interesting.
somebody feels under threat.
I love that we can learn from sports in so many
Mm.
ways. All right, talk to us about the grow model.
The GROW model is a very well used coaching model. So this is the to grow model. The two bit is the topic at the centre. So um, we don't have to follow this model as in we start the conversation with what do you want to discuss, then you go to what's your goal, then your reality, then your options, then your will.
Hmm.
You can actually go all over the place and back again. And but the point is, you can just use it as a framework for a conversation to just jump around and get to where you want to be. But the idea is, it's all about asking some good questions and listening very, very well.
Mm.
Um, it's a great model for your one-to-ones. What do you want to talk about today?
Yeah.
And then that will take you to the next bit. Okay, so you want to talk about what's happening in this school. What do you want to take away from this conversation with me?
Yeah.
Well, I'm looking for some support or steer. It could be that as a chair, it could be this could be your particular skill set.
Hmm.
So you just can move about, and the point is, we may not finish the whole cycle in one conversation,
Oh, okay.
but we're moving towards finding um, the next step. Um, because once you've gone to, okay, so what's the reality of the situation? What's really going on in that school? How do you know that? So, what options have you got to deal with these things
Hmm.
then? Okay, so what do you think is the one thing that you could do that is going to make the biggest difference? Well, this. Okay, so what can you do now then? And that's where you go into the will.
I love that you could start anywhere though,
Yeah,
rather than always having to start with goal.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Because you
That's
can
great.
have a conversation where somebody comes in going, I've got this problem in the school. My options are X, Y, Z. What do you think?
Yeah.
Oh, hold on. Let's just go back a bit.
Yeah. I almost
Why are
think
why are we talking about that?
you could use this in board meetings. I don't know why people don't use that in
Totally.
board meetings.
You could use it in all sorts of different environments, lots of different relationships. It's just
Yeah.
a method to have good conversations,
Yeah.
curious conversations.
Absolutely. No, it's brilliant. I can't believe we've never thought of using that in board meetings, actually. So there's not just the grow model, there's also the Oscar model. I love all
L-
these models. They're so
I
brilliant.
know. Oh, I love a model. Yeah, the Oscar model is lesser known than the Grow
The
model.
grow model.
But for those of you that are experienced coaches, you may well have found Oscar. So Oscar is from the Solutions Focus, Making Coaching and Change Simple, which is by Mark McCurgo and Paul Jackson.
Mm.
Um, so the what we're talking about here is about challenge.
Mhm.
Um, and instead of using grow, what we talk about is okay, what's the outcome that we're trying to achieve?
Mm.
And then we'll scale. Like, where are we now against that on a scale of 1 to 10?
Right. Okay.
Oh, it's a 7. Okay, what would make it an 8? What have we
Love
got to
that.
do to get it an 8?
Yeah.
And then you go into know-how and resources. What have you got? So one of the questions that I ask is, who do you know and respect that would deal with this situation really well?
Oh, I like that.
What would they do in
Yeah.
this situation? Oh, okay, yeah, they would probably do that. Okay, could you do that? Oh, well, why not?
Yeah.
Um, or it could be, have you ever dealt with this situation before? Yes. Okay. Tell me about that. What happened? And what did you learn from that? What can we take from
Mm.
that into this situation? So
Hmm.
kind of digging out the resource that exists within us all. We all have it.
Yeah.
And then it's a case, okay, do you feel comfortable with that? Do you think you can move forward with that? So that's your affirming and your action. And then you review.
I love it.
Yeah, I love this model.
And there's so many good questions in there. Again, like I feel like this stuff could be used in board meetings, not just in review meetings. So it's great
Yeah.
stuff. But actually, probably the most important part is this next slide, isn't it? It's
Mm.
all about listening. And I think we don't
Oh, yeah.
always listen very well, do we? It's not easy.
Yeah. I think, I know whenever I've talked about listening with school, I used to work in school, and a great example, I think there are so many things that impact our ability to listen, but
Mm,
the noise and the interference is huge.
interference.
If you're trying to have a conversation with a school leader and the bell goes and it's lesson change over time, they are not listening to what's
No.
happening in the room. They're listening to what's happening out in the corridor. And so the timing is really important.
Yes.
Um,
And the
and
place you do it.
the place,
Yeah.
yeah, just it's all about getting the right conditions for you and them.
Mm,
Um, but what we should be going for is level 3 listening. And it
mm-hmm.
sounds like, oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. But actually, that is really tough
Mm.
because it's not just about what they're saying, it's
Mm.
sensory listening.
Well, it's the micro expressions. You've got to watch for those. You have to be very aware.
Yeah, properly tuned in. And you've got to shut your own mind off because
Mm,
we all have a mind that drifts
mm,
to, oh, I must remember to go to the post office. Oh,
mm,
it's,
mm.
I've got to be off in 30 minutes. We've got to,
Or even
that's
worse, what am I going to say next? This is the thing people do when they're having a conversation. They're thinking about what they're going to say rather than listening to what's being said.
And as a coach, one of the one of the biggest challenges for me was learning that silence is a gift.
Yeah. Oh, God, that's huge.
And there's this horrible pressure that you feel like you have to fill silence,
Yeah.
and that's what fuels this. What am I going to say next? How am I going to answer that?
Yeah.
If you just let that go and just embrace silence and do that relaxed concentration,
Mm,
when you ask a question, allowing the silence to rumble might
yeah.
feel uncomfortable to begin with, but actually all you're doing is giving your executive the time to digest the question and think through a good answer. It's a gift.
Yeah.
Let the silence prevail.
It's funny. They used to, when I worked on death row, they would never send the attorneys out into the field because we didn't know how to leave the silence. Whereas our investigators were brilliant at it. They knew exactly how to leave the silence there. So I know exactly what you're talking about. It's just being a good listener, isn't it? So there it is. Those are the three. That's everything that you talk about in your three-part guidance. I did want to share some resources that we have available. We have trust development services at CST that can offer help with the executive review. Blue Sky Education have obviously their 360 Opal review. We have a mentoring service for CEOs that's been very successful, but you also have an executive coaching service, don't you?
Yeah. So, so there's me, there's Nick McKenzie, for those of
Nice.
you may know Nick,
Yeah,
and then our colleague Ian Blatherwick, who's former managing partner at Brown Jacobson. We're all three of us are qualified, practicing executive
fantastic.
coaches. So yeah,
And it doesn't have to just be the CEO, right? It can be other
yeah,
other executive leaders.
yeah,
That's
head
good to know.
teachers as well, uh,
Love it.
all
That's great.
sorts.
Just say a huge thank you to you for engaging in this conversation with me. I think it's been fascinating. And I think if we get this right, our trust will really benefit, and our children ultimately will really benefit from this because that's really what it's all about, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Emma. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.